I'm going to use this mic. It is a little bit feeling like a televangelist. holding it in my mouth. Boy, I am just so honored and grateful to see this room full of so many people who have come for such an important occasion. My name is Dayna Matthew. I'm Dean of the GW Law School, and I have the privilege to welcome you today to the Brandt Manott Lecture for the fall of 2023. This is a lecture that was established in 2016. It's always a signature event of our law school calendar. But this year it takes on even greater significance. Today's lecture is extremely meaningful because it is also dedicated to the memory of our legendary friend and Professor Emeritus Judge Thomas Buergenthal. As you know, Judge Buergenthal was a pioneer in the field of international human rights law, and he was one of our law school's most distinguished and beloved professors. Professor Emeritus Buergenthal served for many years on our faculty, both before and after his decade of service as a judge on the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Our entire GW Law School community experienced a deep sense of loss, of course, in May, when he passed away at the age of 89. But Judge Buergenthal's legacy lives on, not only through the principles which he dedicated his life to and the passion he instilled in countless students and colleagues here at GW and around the globe, but he continues to instill and inspire to this very day. You'll hear much more about the section that was named in the Inner Courts after him, and all of the ways in which we continue to live the inspiring, incredible life of Judge Buergenthal today. We're pleased together as a community to remember him and celebrate his life through reflections, which you'll hear from Professor Emeritus, I can hardly say it, Ralph Steinhardt, and by screening the documentary produced by the International Nuremberg Principles Academy, which is titled Peace Through Justice, The Legacy of Thomas Buergenthal. Please join me first in extending some welcomes. I first want to extend a very warm and grateful welcome to Peggy, to John, to Randy, to Eliza, to the Buergenthal family. All of you who have joined us today do us a very great honor. Would you agree with me? I'm also very delighted to welcome and to thank our Brandt Manott lecturer, Judge Sheila Ibo Suji. Thank you so much. You'll be introduced, of course, later by Professor Sean Murphy, but you are the former president of the International Criminal Court and a perfect speaker to address concerns close to Judge Buergenthal's heart, most notably the need to pursue peace and justice through law. So thank you so much for being here. The substantive discussion will continue after the lecture with an extraordinary panel of speakers, as you can tell we're set up for that here, moderated by Dean Rosa Solario, who will herself address striving for peace through justice today and share her intellectual passions for the perspectives on the International Criminal Court. So thank you also, Dean Solario. A few more thanks are in order. I want to take a moment now to express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the families of Charles Manott and Joe Brand for their generous endowment of this very important lectureship in international law. We are extremely proud and truly blessed. We also want to say that the late Joe Brand is someone we count as a member of our family, inspiring us still as well. Also the late Ambassador Charles T. Manott. They are among one of the most, or two of the most distinguished members of our alumni community, and we're extremely grateful to call them our own. And finally, let me say a thanks and extend my warm and deep gratitude. I see you, Barb, but I don't see. What are you doing separated? I don't get that. Okay.
Friendship.
Wes and Barb Burnett, who have generously endowed our deanship in international and comparative law and are here with us today. I can tell you that I'm allowed to joke with them because I was at their 50th wedding anniversary, and I know that nothing can separate these two, so it threw me off just a little bit. I see that they're here with their son, Edward Burnett. We've met also, and I think your daughter-in-law, Professor Alka Pradam, is here also?
She's coming for the panel.
She's coming for the panel. And Alka's mom, Indira, will be here as well. So this is really a family affair, and I'm thrilled to share with all of the Burnetts, the Pradas, and the Buergenthals that we at the GW Law family now consider this one big, happy, and informed community. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Today's amazing program, which will convene critical scholars and actors in sectors in the pursuit of peace and justice, is one of the many ways in which GW Law demonstrates its deep commitment to leadership in the field of international and comparative law. This is a commitment so important today amidst armed conflict, amidst the denial of human rights that we unfortunately continue to see across the globe every day. I want to finally extend my sincere gratitude to the International and Comparative Law Program, the faculty that are my colleagues here at GW Law, for the work and the dedication that it took to organize today's program. Professor Sean Murphy, Professor Ralph Steinhardt, Dean Rosa Solario, Leah Calabro, and Yinzi Da. Yinzi, I saw you when I came in. Thank you very much for all the work that has gone into producing this program. Last but not least, you'll have an opportunity to enjoy the work of our events planner. Her name is Deb Gales, and she is an associate director on our staff that makes sure every event is planned to perfection. Thank you for the event co-sponsors, which is the American Society of International Law, the ABA section of International Law, and the International Law Student Association. Now that's all the gratitude I'm allowed to spend your time listening to, but there is so much more in my heart. I think it's better, however, that we all begin this exceptional program that's been planned. It's my privilege now to invite Professor Emeritus Ralph Steinhardt to the podium.
As each of you know in your own way, it is an honor to honor the memory of Tom Buergenthal. It is a communal honor that to celebrate this incomparable man together, to say together, l'chaim, to life, even as, especially as, we mourn his passing. I offer a particular thank you to my colleague, Sean Murphy, for assuring that this year's Brand Manat celebration included an acknowledgement of Tom Buergenthal and what he meant to each of us in the room, what he meant to this great law school, what he meant to the wide world, what he meant to his family, beloved and dear to us all. I can tell you that I had occasion to introduce Tom Buergenthal at various times over the decades. And in retrospect, it was a joy. At the time, it was pretty intimidating. It won't shock you to learn that I tended to be pretty sentimental, even sappy on these occasions. And Tom, of course, was the exact opposite, with the consequence that I tended to say things that embarrassed me and irritated Tom. So sappy he distinctly was not, right? He could be wicked, actually, though he put on a good front, that he was never wicked. But he had a sense of humor, always with a twinkle in his eye, and never sappy. My consolation was that my excesses on these occasions tended to amuse his beloved wife, Peggy, who I'm truly delighted to see here this afternoon, along with other members of Tom's extended family. I am pretty sure that I have your sympathy in this task, trying to convey in 15 minutes or so even a hint of what this extraordinary person meant to us and who he was. In thinking through what I might say about Tom this afternoon, I discovered that a little bit of Google remains a very dangerous thing, especially under the influence of ChatGPT. But undeterred, I foolishly went back and I actually read the citations for some of the dozens of awards that he received over the years. So, the honorary degree from NYU, the Wolfgang Friedman Award from Columbia, the Gruber Foundation Justice Award from the American Society of International Law, the Goler-Butcher Award for Excellence in Human Rights, the Manley Hudson Medal. And that is just the tip of this iceberg. There were many other recognitions and scholarships and awards and honorary degrees. And I can report to you all on the basis of that survey that the citations do begin to convey the breadth and the depth of Tom's achievements as a scholar, as a teacher, as an author, as a dean, as a mentor, as a judge. John Sexton, for example, when he was president of NYU, had it right when he said, and I'm quoting John, "You are a mighty exemplar of magnificent intelligence in support of the highest aspirations of humanity as you lead us to a world in which individual freedom and human dignity are fully protected." I want you to imagine those words in the echoing chamber of Yankee Stadium. And obviously, if John Sexton said it, it must be true, so long as it has nothing to do with real estate or faculty governance or beard hygiene. Sometimes these award citations would summarize Tom's miraculous personal story captured in the memoir, A Lucky Child. As all of you know, in this book, Tom recounts his journey from the Nazi concentration camps to liberation, and then his miraculous, joyful, heartbreaking reunion with his mother years after the war. As I've mentioned on other occasions, I think that A Lucky Child is the only memoir that has ever been written that belongs in the mystery section of the bookstore. And I say that because right at the heart of this remarkable narrative is a brain-twisting mystery. And the mystery is, will the author survive Auschwitz and Sachsenhausen to write a memoir or not? Will he survive or not? And if he does survive, how exactly does he do that? And even beyond that, can he hold on to his humanity in spite of all that he had seen and suffered before the age of 9? And then this, if he can succeed in that way, what must I do to breathe some of that same air? Can I get a slice of the Buergenthal cake that enables me to remain hopeful and loving and a little bit wicked in spite of evil in the world? Sign me up. He holds on to his humanity. In short, even when you know the outcome, more or less, it's still a mystery how Tom came to be with us at all, let alone to have called this law school his academic home for more than 30 years, and to have touched each of us in various ways, whether we know it or not. At a minimum, we owe a debt of gratitude to the captain and crew of the USS General Greeley, which is an otherwise nondescript Navy transport ship that brought Tom as a teenager from Bremerhaven to New York in the early 1950s, thence to Bethany College and NYU Law School, then to Harvard Law School for his LLM and his SJD degree. And you know, the rest is, as they say, nonfiction, right, in our bookstore. It's nonfiction. So the award citations for Tom certainly convey the resume. They do a good job of that. But they don't convey the man. They don't convey the mensch. And it is traditional enough on occasions like this one to acknowledge his lasting jurisprudence, the jurisprudence that he crafted on the Inter-American Court of Human Rights or the International Court of Justice, or the analytical power and the political savvy that he brought to the El Salvador Truth Commission, or the UN Human Rights Committee, or the Administrative Tribunal of the Inter-American Development Bank, or the Claims Resolution Tribunal for Dormant Accounts in Switzerland, which was one step in the long process of resolving Nazi-era asset claims. What characterized Tom's work in each of these places is the neat trick of being both meticulous and innovative. Dip anywhere at random in his body of work and prepare to be dazzled by Tom's ability to stay true to doctrine, absolutely, but simultaneously to apply the law in creative and exciting ways, as though the law had as much jazz in it as it has arithmetic, right? It has theme, absolutely, but it has this variation and this improvisation on themes of which Tom was a master. And you can see that in his work. So, for example, one example of hundreds, the Honduras disappearance decision in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which awarded compensation to the families of victims of disappearance in Honduras. So the people who kidnapped, murdered, and hid the bodies of political opponents. You'll appreciate that this is a crime which, if it's done right, cannot be traced. Right? If it's done as designed, you can never get accountability. You can't even get assurance that the person is dead. In deciding the case against Honduras, Tom led the Inter-American Court to think in new, let's call it jazz-like ways about state responsibility. Technically, doctrinally, he did this by grafting a doctrine of due diligence into the body of human rights law, something that had never been done before, even if due diligence was a familiar enough concept from other fields of law. And it's not like Tom made it up. Tom found the due diligence obligation in the implicit language of the convention, the American Convention on Human Rights. And if I could just take 30 seconds to explain how this changed the notion of state responsibility, meaning not only that states had a right to be left alone, which is generally what sovereignty has meant, and not just that the governments had to refrain from doing bad things, okay, but now they had to do something affirmative. They had an affirmative responsibility to take steps to protect human rights, to investigate and prosecute abuses by governments and by private actors. And that due diligence idea, which had its fountainhead in the Honduras decision, has now grown and thrived for more than a generation. It is now routinely and successfully used in other courts and international institutions to challenge state practices regarding domestic violence, or economic and social rights, or environmental protection, or we might say the right to peace, of which you will hear much more later. And so the suggestion that Tom, in the crucible of this one case, changed the way we think about sovereignty from the right to be left alone or the obligation to refrain from certain acts into something much more affirmative is a testament to his genius. Let me also say that it had its roots in the law. It also had wings, in a way. You know, and no creature on earth that I know of has both roots and wings. But if I could follow Tom's example and somehow teach my students or my children or myself, for that matter, how to have both roots and wings in this world, I would consider it a singular success and one more small manifestation of Tom's enduring legacy. And that's just one example of dozens. Would have been enough. It would have been enough if Tom had just been a great judge, right? In the words of the traditional Passover song, Dayenu, right? Hebrew for it would have been enough for us. And we could all sing Dayna in just a few minutes. But Tom was not only a great judge, he was a world-class scholar. He was author or co-author of more than a dozen books, scores of articles. He held endowed professorships at the University of Texas and Emory before becoming the Lobingier Professor at this law school. He served on the board of editors of the American Journal of International Law, among many others. And every scholar in this field has to engage Tom's published work. And in fact, though, he wasn't just a scholar, right? So he wasn't just a judge, he wasn't just a scholar, he was the cause of scholarship in others. And I, in particular, remember being on a dissertation committee for someone who was getting an SJD here. And Tom looked over his immense bookshelf and figured out what was not there. What's the dog that did not bark? What's the book that needs to be on my shelf and isn't? And that's what Tom directed this student to write. And that became an award-winning book in its own right. So Dayna, it would have been enough if Tom had just been a great judge and not a formidable scholar as well, but he was a formidable scholar. And that too would have been that too would have been enough, but he was also an inspiring teacher and colleague. One student said in an evaluation, I'm quoting, "What you write? One of the all-time greats in international law, but that's not important." Really? Sorry. One of the most incredibly experienced professors, but that's not pivotal. Really? One exceptional human being, and I am proud to have him as my mentor. And that's the Tom I remember, the Tom who was the inspiration. And I will never forget being 30 years old and teaching and for the tenure review process, and having two members of the faculty review this punk kid teaching international law, and those two people were Louis Sohn and Tom Buergenthal. Fine, it all worked out. It all worked out. I'm standing in front of you, and now I'm looking at a brilliant retirement. So, I guess maybe the one thing we all share in this room, and with this I will close, is our appreciation of Tom's clear-eyed, sometimes inexplicable hopefulness. This, after all, is a guy who made the case that virtually every great leap forward in human rights law is directly attributable to the rankest hypocrisy by governments. Right? So instead of getting all cynical because governments say one thing and do something else on the human rights field, Tom would say, "Oh boy, a hypocrite. I'm going to exploit that. They've said these things, they can't back out of it, or they can try. But every great leap forward," he said, "in human rights law was the result of rank, blatant hypocrisy by governments." So that far from moaning and whining about government's hypocrisy and saying one thing and doing another, Tom convinced me, and I tried to teach my students, that human rights advocates should be downright grateful for hypocrisy, and they should exploit it for all that it's worth. This hope idea is in the seal of the Buergenthal Inn of Court, dum spiro spero, the Latinism that means, while I breathe, I hope. And that's Tom. It reminds me that after all of the horrors that came out of Pandora's box, the cruelty, the disease, the hatred, all things that Tom had seen and experienced firsthand, the last thing in the box, the thing that made all the rest of it manageable, was hope. Tom showed me that it was an essentially hopeful calling to hold people and governments accountable for their violations of human rights, and that it was essential to the enterprise, and this is key, to assure that those who were accused or convicted of human rights abuses have their own human rights protected in the process. He demonstrated to me that the people who survived World War II, and who gave us the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, like Louis Sohn, understood, as even smart people in late generations do not, just how much realpolitik, how much cold-eyed pragmatism lay behind their turn to human rights in enforceable form. The images from Abu Ghraib or from Guantanamo Bay and their consequences show again just how long-term, self-preservationist, and pragmatic the Human Rights Project really can be. That and the recognition that wars and other national security crises are often human rights crises in their late stages. I suspect that we're going to have to learn those hard lessons all over again with the rise of authoritarianism, intolerance, xenophobia in many countries around the world. I worry when I see compassion becoming contemptible. And that is what has happened in our contemporary politics, which means that we are positioned not just to mourn Tom, but to learn from his example and to act in the now, in the right now. Tom once made that very point to a room full of Holocaust survivors, saying, and I'm quoting him, "Unless we can identify with today's victims and find ways to express our solidarity with them, our survival will have been nothing more than an act of random good luck of no lasting significance," end quote. That he would bring so deep a humanity and so relentless a sense of hope in the face of a world of troubles is the gift that a mensch gives to the rest of us, and that we can carry around with us like a treasure in our pockets. So I'll close with a brief salute to Tom Buergenthal with two brief snippets of poetry. The first is from Anne Sexton's poem called "The Children." She writes, "We must all stop dying in the little ways, in the craters of hate, in the potholes of indifference. We must all stop dying in the little ways, in the craters of hate, in the potholes of indifference." That's Tom Buergenthal. Or hear the words of Philip Larkin, who's generally too morose or too obscene, or both, for an occasion like this. But the closing line of Larkin's The Mower: "We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time." We, all of us, stand on the shoulders of giants, and every so often we get to say, "Thank you, giant. Thank you, Tom. I see you, and I am forever grateful to be in your orbit." Thank you all.